Hey guys, so welcome back. Now obviously if you've seen the last video and the other video regarding the top 2 presidential candidates right now for South Korea, one on the left, one on the right, I think you can basically say we are having a leadership crisis. Now, you may know this notable figure, King Sejong the Great of the Joseon Dynasty, and he is lauded as the inventor of the modern Korean alphabet and the ruler that has brought in so many wonderful inventions and a period of peace and prosperity for Korea. And after King Sejong the Great, you really don't hear about many other leaders. You don't. Maybe the Admiral Lee Sun-shin, who is also in Gwanghwamun Square. But why do we bring up a king from like 600 years ago constantly? He was born in 1397 and he died 1450. He started ruling 1418. So what is that? 28 or 38 years? Just 38 years. 600 years ago. We are still treasuring that moment because leadership is actually hard to come by in this system. So in the past, when Korea was ruled by a monarchy, you had no choice. You had to hope and pray that the next kid born was going to be a good leader. If not, you had to wait. If you had to wait and die before a great leader came, you just had to die. Perhaps wait until the next life. But as we've seen here, you're going to have to wait quite a few lifetimes if you're going to wait 600 years to keep talking about a great leader. And if you believe in YOLO, you only live once, that's going to be really hard. So why do we consistently, even in this modern age, even in 2021, insist on saying, well, just wait for the right leader to come up, or we just haven't had the right leader yet? Why are we putting so much emphasis again on the executive function, basically the leader of the country, when we know that part of the reason why we moved to a democracy was to distribute leadership because we knew that one person couldn't handle it all? Even the French with their French Revolution, they could see that constitutional monarchy was the transition into a democracy. So even back in like the 1700s, 1800s, they were trying to get ready for a different type of leadership because they realized what goes on in one man's head cannot compute everything that needs to go on in a nation. So why are we putting ourselves in this vulnerable position time and time and time again by trying to wait for some savior to pop up on our election ballot? So what we can see happening right now is probably a signal that we need to invest more in a system that can deliver a good life now, rather than keep waiting for some mythical creature that will come through and lead us for probably only, what, at best 38 years, and then that's it. So the reason why I'm bringing this up and bringing an intro like that up, in the Conservative Party right now, I don't think this has gotten a lot of press around the world, but in Korea, this 36-year-old guy, I think his birthday just happened, so when he was actually elected to the position of the party leader, he was only 35 and he looks it. So in Korea, like the party leaders, essentially, like I would say, like in America, the party chairman, like either the DNC or RNC chair, plus whoever is pretty much in the legislature and heading the party politically. Even though in Korea, in the National Assembly, they will have the floor leader, but really it's this party leader that, even though they're not necessarily in the National Assembly, kind of exert this force where the leaders, even within the National Assembly, the elected lawmakers, are guided by the party leader. And so this guy has not even held an elected office, and he became the party leader. And he literally is like the age of the sons of a lot of these people who are ruling Korea. And so this is like an amazing shift in generations or kind of perceptions, or what does it really say? Because before all of this happened, the Conservative Party, even they will consistently say that they were about to fall apart. The doors were about to be shuttered. Like after the President Park impeachment, they really weren't able to get back on their feet, and they were suffering loss after loss and a lot of loss in confidence. And so there was this opening, I guess, for this young guy to come in and revitalize somewhat of the base, or try to bring more promises, and especially appeal to the disaffected younger generation of voters in their 20s and 30s. So he was able to appeal to that crowd, and he was running neck and neck against this other lady who's been in there for a while, but she's kind of lost a lot. We won't even talk about her. It's just a bad taste. However, as you can probably tell, this age difference is creating probably a lot of tension, even though the age part, I think everybody has been pretty mum about. Like the older crowd, they don't want to admit that they have a problem with his age, especially since this is a weird position where he suddenly outranks everybody, but they still feel like, this kid, man, this kid, what does this kid know? Why is this kid telling me what to do? But then they kind of can't say that. So you can tell that is just a setup. That is just a setup for conflict within their own party. So what we do see on the surface, though, definitely about the chatter, is questions about the way he's running the party. There have been criticisms about how he's using the party's messaging platforms as his own personal, like Twitter, or his own personal stances that don't match up with the rest of the party infrastructure. Before he got in, though, what I found that was also kind of like an indictment on what we're talking about, corruption and the prosecution, one of the big party bigwigs, who's right now suffering from a family crisis of his own, I believe because of his son getting into trouble. So he was supposed to be like a contender for president, but he's kind of on the back burner. But he said that the problem with Lee Jun-suk going into the party chairman position, not just because he was young, is that he had no experience with the prosecution. Now, that to me is essentially admitting that he has no experience in making deals, cutting deals with the prosecution. That the prosecution is actually not just for prosecuting and taking matters to court, but actually negotiating and creating a source of power that can then be parsed out and distributed and used like cash. So if you have control over the prosecution and you have control over the party, control over the legislation, if you're in this sort of pipeline and link, he's basically admitted that there's a sausage factory going on there. And not just men, but I'm just saying like a sausage factory in the sense that in order for power to move, you do need to have collaboration between prosecutorial deals, like which way a case will go, and political power and advantage. So he had a bit of a honeymoon with the press. People were like, oh, he's so young and he's going to revitalize the party. He's appealing to younger voters. Oh, look at him biking to work. Oh, look at him being so, with like the new crowd. This guy, if you're wondering where he came from, he is lauded because he went to Harvard. He transferred there, I believe, in his sophomore year. He got his degree from Harvard, and then he came back to Korea, and then he started some venture startup firm where during that time he met President Park at one of these big government-sponsored startup events. And then she took him under his wing, and he became known as one of President Park's kids, and he became like a mouthpiece for the conservative youth. Like, what does a conservative look like when they're in their 20s and they're starting out their career? So he was able to go under that political protege status, and he's worked his way through pretty much being like a media talking head. He wasn't able to win any elections, but he's definitely been in the public eye as a party fixture of the next generation, and especially when the older generation is very stingy about giving opportunities like this to the next generation. He really does stand out because he's pretty much the only guy that you can really identify as a real moniker of that age and the conservative movement in Korea. However, I think they got exactly, if you're thinking about karma and you're a little bit against what the conservatives had done to this country, they sort of, in a weird, ironic way, got a bit of their own medicine. It's as if now they have to listen to their kid, tell them what to do after they abused that generation. Now, the thing is that he's not totally progressive, I would say. He almost sounds like a mini version of an old man. He even rankled old man's feathers for being probably even more old and narrow-minded, plus naive and young at the same time, when he said that he wanted to get rid of the gender ministry and the unification ministry. He's like, don't need them, don't think that they're necessary anymore in society. So whether he believes this or not, what he is appealing to is the base of younger conservatives who seem to be disaffected men, similar to the way that you would describe some of the disaffected men who vote for Trump in the United States. People who see that the world is becoming unfair, their advantages are being taken away, but they didn't see those as advantages that are unfair, they just saw it as rights. You know, my right to have this is being taken away, and there's a lot of resentment politics going on right now. There's no big great future vision. Everything looks like it's daunting. Your life looks like it's going to be worse than your parents, and you need somebody to blame, and he is offering two very convenient standbys. One, women and the growing feminist movement or women's rights movement, and number two, North Korea, as always. Now, the thing that is a problem with the elimination of the unification ministry, even for conservatives and especially for conservatives, is that we also have the unification ministry to act as sort of a pseudo diplomatic channel or embassy, because we do not recognize North Korea. Therefore, through the unification ministry, that is our channel diplomatically. It serves more than just saying like, oh, we want to try to plan to unify with North Korea. What he's getting at is saying like, well, these liberals who want to support the unification ministry, oh, they want almost like North Korea to invade us. No, the only option forward for South Korea is to subsume North Korea, and we lead, they follow, or nothing else. Therefore, let's get rid of this unification ministry. But then even conservatives are saying like, look, if you do that, then what are you going to do? You're going to have to acknowledge North Korea as like an equal country and a status. That's even worse. So people prefer to work through the unification ministry, whether you're on the left or the right. It sort of serves the agenda of both political parties, so that's probably why it's still there, and it's probably why the actual unification part is not the highest priority, where South Korea is notorious for just kicking the can down the road policy-wise in terms of unification with North Korea. And then also from the public does not really want to deal with that right now. They don't want to pay for that right now. So this unification ministry to a naive person could seem like it's unnecessary and you can use it to kind of score political points, but really it is a vital diplomatic channel between the two Koreas. Also, this thing about the gender and the feminism and the far right males especially being very hostile against women, that has just only grown and has probably expanded its reach into less far right constituents in terms of Korean males. There is again a sense of if you haven't had a history of negotiating justice and rights for more and more groups that have been abused, then if you see a sudden change, you suddenly feel like they're taking what we used to have, and it falls under this mental model of, you know, taking from each other, battling from each other. And that is how a lot of men are interpreting the rising women's rights movement in Korea. And we can get into this in another video, but you can, if you come to Korea, you can no longer do this. Like if you want to say like, oh, just, you know, put a little bit of cream into my coffee, or just add a little bit of salt. If you do this, you are going to get slaughtered, because this essentially has now become like a secret sign for the feminists to attack men, basically saying like something about their penis size. And so you know how like there's like those hand signs and stuff that far right people use in the United States? Well, the far right here believe that women are secretly trying to infiltrate like advertising agencies and putting this kind of stuff in ads where they don't belong, to make fun of men. Like a lot of these men have become very paranoid about their pee-pees, you know, and the people who get really upset about this essentially are pretty much saying that they have something to be upset about. This is a very interesting kind of quandary that they put themselves in, because why get so mad about that if you have nothing to get mad about? And it's very odd that this is also like kind of getting a pickup in more the younger generation. It's gonna sound weird, but let's just say the younger generation guys, like more and more of them don't really have this to worry about. Let's just say that, probably, you know what I mean? So what is going on with all of these people who are very upset? Well, it's not everybody. That's the thing. It is just a subset of the population that is very loud, that is trying to oppress other people in order to feel like they have gotten what they needed out of society. Some of the things that Lee Jun-suk has been criticized for that seems a little bit unfair is like the media asked him like, oh, do you have a girlfriend? They criticized his use of a bicycle that was meant for an eco-friendly campaign to go from the subway station to the National Assembly, which is actually quite a long walk, but everyone's saying like, oh, you could do that in 2 minutes, but it's actually like a 10-minute walk plus. And they were accusing him of being so extravagant, wearing like Ferragamo shoes, that he even like took a picture of the inside of his shoes to show that he's not wearing Ferragamos, that they're very much a humble Korean brand. So he's kind of going through the ringer as well, and people criticized his latest meeting with Yoon Suk-yeol when he decided to join the party, because they're actually enemies, they're foes, they don't want each other to succeed. And Mr. Shin of the YouTube channel saying like the way that it looked like Lee Jun-suk was talking to the elder Yoon Suk-yeol when they were putting on the stickers was very rude and condescending. And so Lee Jun-suk, it does seem like, is taking more of like a badass approach, saying like, look, you gotta listen, if you ain't gonna, you know, join the party line. Like he's pretty much trying to do the, you know, crack the whip. If he didn't, he would also probably get really criticized for his lack of strength. And so he's doing what essentially what these old guys would probably do in the same situation. So it's almost as if like you are now confronted with a mirror, And so good luck for them looking at themselves getting treated the way that they would treat themselves. So I just think this is a very interesting thing to look at and start to follow, especially in Korean politics, because we've never had this situation before. However, I will say that youth leading this country, you really do have to put this back into perspective. When Park Chung-hee, like the people on the right who really glorify him as a great leader and people on the left say he's a dictator, when he really ascended to power, he was in his early 40s. So that guy even as well was very young and had not the most mature approach to governing, which is probably why we have had a lot of kind of like this psychopathic turmoil and really a lot of trauma that has been inflicted on a lot of society when somebody just says like, oh, screw the democracy, I'm going to rewrite the constitution and we're going to become a dictatorship. And you can see a lot of the immaturity that had been more of his personality get imbued into what he called a Korean tradition or culture. So sometimes now you really have to be very mindful of like, what was Korean really? What is traditional really, even though that keeps changing? And what was stamped on as basically like, I want it this way. This is my personality as the dictator. And I'm going to say that this is the way that Korean people do things. Because if we did things the way that we've always done, we would be wearing straw shoes, rubber shoes, and riding on donkeys. So let's not front. So don't automatically assume everything that some crazy Korean ajashi does is Korean culture, because he just might be a crazy guy. We don't even have to call him a Korean guy. He should just take responsibility for his own actions as an individual and stop trying to put all of his sins and imperfections on the Korean culture. So in contrast, if you're wondering like, well, what does like a functional Korean person look like? Well, they kind of stay out of all of this mess. The way that I've just described, I think is based on a loser mentality, where basically like, if you can't have something, you want to either take it away from somebody else, which is kind of like the loser right mentality. The loser left mentality is like, take it away from everybody so that everybody has nothing. But both sides do not create growth and prosperity and vitality for a country. What I think the winner mentality in Korea is that they kind of like ignore all of this stuff, and they are like jumping through hoops, and where they cannot make a change, they'll just have to work around or maybe even engage in some of the behavior that is not completely legal just to get the ends justifying the means. But there is a sense of they don't need a thing to be part of their reason for feeling good about themselves, because they don't have a sense of inferiority complex to begin with. I mean, that's where I think it starts. And so they're just really focused on looking at an obstacle course. That's how I see them. And it's kind of cool to see them, because you see how quiet they are in terms of just navigating this obstacle course. And there's a bit of acceptance, like this is just what it is and we just have to kind of get through it. And I think that is a mentality that where I see a lot of real successful Korean people adopt, is that they'll get through it. They're not like super hung up about the moral compass, but then at the same time they try not to do anything immoral. It's just that if you have to do it, you got to do it. And so that's why I'm saying they're not perfect, but it's very interesting how their mentality is not going to be a real dogmatic clinging to some sort of acceding to authority at all times and obeying. They'll look like they're obeying, but really they're not. Where I see people get really upset and resentful and start to engage in this bad behavior are people who actually do believe in this supposed cultural tradition of always listening to people who are supposedly higher than you, even if it is abusive, and then really adopting this mindset of like, well, you got to deal with it, withstand it, let it go, and then like in even biblical terms, if they slap you on one side of the cheek, let them have the other. Problem is that I think a lot of people, once they feel that second slap, they realize, oh, I am not one of these people who really wanted to just put up with it and give them my other cheek. And so then they're out for revenge, and then they're just obsessed with just kind of settling the scores, and they create more bad karma where they start slapping other people on both sides of the cheek. But if you're going to take a biblical stance, you kind of also have to remember you could either take the approach of giving the other cheek or storming the walls of Jericho, taking Jericho down, because the Lord says you must conquer your enemies. So which one is it? You have to decide for yourself. And if you're not one of these people who can stand getting their cheeks slapped and pretend you are though, but then you want to stab other people in the back, then maybe you don't want to give your cheek all the time and pretend that that's the way that everybody should also follow out of Korean tradition. Because there is also a tradition of people not accepting that, drawing a line, and moving ahead without being abused. Think about that. Anyhow, so that is generally what's going on. If you're wondering like who this young kid is leading the conservatives and is just shaking hands all the time with the leading presidential candidate from that side, well, that is Lee Jun-suk, and he is that young dude who is leading the party and kind of portending a different wave of the way that Korean politics is moving right now. We just don't know whether it's going to crash or just be gentle lapping upon the shores. All right, we'll see you again next time, guys. Bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.